It was supposed to be a routine deal, one of those big money meetings my father, Rob, excelled at. We were on our way to finalize the deal that would secure our cartel's grip on the city for another decade. I sat in the car, fiddling with my phone, as we stopped outside the warehouse. My father glanced at me with that reassuring smile, the one that said, "Don't worry, I've got this." "Stay in the car, Ella," he told me. And for once, I listened. I stayed. But then everything happened so fast. I heard tires screeching, and before I could register what was going on, a black car skidded into view, blocking us. My father barely flinched. He stepped out like he had everything under control, just like he always did. I watched through the tinted glass, my heart pounding. And then, bang. One gunshot. Just one. I froze. My hand gripped the door handle, but I didn't move. The car that cornered us sped off, its wheels screaming against the pavement, leaving nothing but dust and silence behind. When I finally managed to push the door open, my heart dropped into my stomach. My father lay crumpled on the ground, blood pooling beneath him. "Dad," I whispered, running to him. I collapsed beside him, pulling him into my arms. He looked at me, his eyes heavy, filled with things unsaid. "Ella," he rasped, barely able to get the word out. I held him tighter, but I knew. I knew he was leaving me. My father, Rob Marino, the most feared and respected Mafia don in the city, took his last breath in my arms. And just like that, he was gone. That night, I sat in the mansion's living room, my hands numb, my heart heavier than I thought it could ever feel. The house was full of shadows and whispers. I could hear the staff murmuring in the hallways, their words low but sharp. "The cartel's finished," they said. "She can't run it. She's too soft." I leaned back on the leather couch, staring at the ceiling. They weren't wrong. I didn't have the steel in my veins that my father did. When he was alive, I took care of the charity arm of the cartel, visiting orphanages, handing out presents, making sure our reputation stayed clean on the outside. I liked the kids. I liked helping them. But this? Running an empire built on fear and blood? It felt impossible. The next day, I found myself sitting in my father's study. His desk smelled like leather and cigars, just the way he left it. His picture was there, too, framed neatly on the corner of the desk. I stared at it, trying to pull some kind of strength from that image, but I just felt lost. Completely and utterly lost. John, my father's closest advisor, knocked softly before stepping inside. He carried a stack of papers under one arm, his expression grim. "The rival gangs are already making moves," he told me. "They think you're weak, and they'll come for everything." I said nothing. I already knew it. John shifted, clearing his throat. "Your father and I were talking before, about a merger. A way to keep the cartel strong. The Carlo family, they have a son, Matteo. The two families joining forces would put us back on top. A marriage. Of course. I should have seen that coming. I nodded slowly. Set it up. John was on the phone immediately, arranging the meeting while I stared out the window, watching the sun disappear behind the hills. I'd always thought I'd marry for love, not for power. But I didn't have the luxury of dreaming anymore. My father's empire was crumbling, and I had to hold it together, even if that meant marrying a stranger. The next morning, I was dressed and sitting in the back of the car, my thoughts swirling as we drove to the Carlo estate. I kept staring out the window, trying to calm the storm in my chest, but nothing worked. When we pulled up to their estate, my jaw almost dropped. It was stunning, gardens that looked like they belonged in a palace, cliffs overlooking the sea, and an air of old money and power. The butler was already waiting for us, bowing slightly as he ushered John and me into the house. I sat down in the meeting room, stealing glances out the window at the view. But when the Carlos walked in, I straightened. Mr. Carlo, head of the family, and his wife were surprisingly friendly, nothing like I'd expected. They welcomed me warmly, telling me there was no need for formalities when I stood to greet them. But then I saw him. Matteo. He walked in behind his parents, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that could have been sculpted from marble. He was beautiful, if I'm being honest. Almost unreal. But as I extended my hand to him, his cold, dark eyes locked with mine, and I saw nothing but hostility. I forced a polite smile. I wasn't here for fairy tales, I was here to save what was left of my father's legacy. The meeting went smoothly. Mr. Carlo and John did most of the talking, and by the end of it, the merger was official. As we left the estate, Matteo stood silently by the door, his gaze following me like a shadow. On the ride home, I told John my thoughts. His parents were lovely, but Matteo? Something's off about him. John nodded but didn't say much. That night, I sat in my father's study, staring at his picture again. Dad, I whispered, I wish you were here. I don't know what to do. But there was no answer, just silence. I swallowed the lump in my throat and tried to clear my head. I couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. I decided I needed a break, one last night of freedom before I was thrown into a life I didn't choose. There was a small club for VIPs downtown, the kind of place where people like me could disappear for a few hours. I needed that. I needed to let loose, even if just for one night. I went upstairs, changed into something sleek, and slipped out of the mansion. The night was young, and I was going to savor it, because soon enough, my life would no longer be mine. The bar was my destination. I needed a drink and maybe a moment to breathe, away from all the chaos of cartels and arranged marriages. I sat at the bar, ordered a whiskey neat, and let the burn settle deep. The music thumped behind me, and the crowd grew louder. I turned my head to glance over my shoulder, and there he was. Matteo. In a private section, surrounded by a flock of girls. He looked relaxed, laughing with them, his arm draped over a blonde's shoulder. I felt my stomach twist. I whipped my head back around, pretending I hadn't seen him, but my heart pounded in frustration. Of course, Matteo would be here. I downed the rest of my drink, ready to leave. As I slid off the bar stool, I bumped into someone, and when I looked up, it was him. Matteo stood towering over me, looking annoyed. What are you doing here? His voice was low, almost a growl. I raised my brow. You're not the boss of me. He smirked, though it didn't reach his eyes. Actually, I am. You're my fiancé, remember? I let out a laugh, bitter and sharp. That's a technicality. I turned to walk away, but before I could take another step, a guy tried to dance with me. I politely declined, but he didn't take the hint and kept pushing. Before I could tell him off, Matteo appeared behind me, gripping the guy's arm. His voice was calm but cold. That's my fiancé, back off. The guy stumbled back, muttering an apology, and before I knew what was happening, Matteo grabbed my hand and pulled me toward his car. You're going home. He ordered his driver to take me back to the house. I sat in stunned silence during the drive. Once home, I went straight to my room, trying to make sense of everything. Matteo Carlo wasn't just arrogant, he was possessive. Curious and restless, I picked up my phone and searched his name. The search results made my heart skip. He was exactly what I feared, a notorious playboy with a ruthless reputation in the Mafia world. Girls, clubs, fights, his life was tabloid material. And now I was engaged to him. The next morning, I got a call from an unknown number. Hello? I answered. Ella, dear. It's Mrs. Carlo. Her voice was warm, but what she said next made my chest tighten. The wedding is in 3 days. We've arranged everything. Please stop by the house for fittings and to spend some time with Matteo. 3 days. That was all I had before I became Mrs. Carlo. I agreed, knowing that refusing wasn't an option, not if I wanted to protect my father's legacy. The fitting went smoothly, but as I was leaving the room, I bumped into Matteo. His face was hard, his eyes stormy. What the hell was that last night? He snapped. Before I could answer, he leaned closer. "We're getting married, Ella. You're going to be my wife, and you'll play by my rules. Got it?" His tone left no room for argument. "What I do outside doesn't concern you." With that, he turned and walked away. I stood there, realizing I wasn't marrying a man I could love. I was marrying my enemy. The wedding day arrived in a blur. I plastered on a smile, playing the role of a joyful bride. Matteo and I exchanged vows under the watchful eyes of our families, and soon enough, we were on a private plane to a secluded island for our honeymoon. Those 5 days felt more like a game of cat and mouse. Matteo was distant, avoiding me at every turn. He had separate rooms, and every night, I saw him with different girls from the resort. But in the mornings, we sat together for breakfast, pretending we were the perfect couple. I didn't know what to feel: anger, sadness, or indifference. When we returned home, Matteo took me to his private residence, where I tried to build a routine. I made breakfast for him, waited for him to come home at night, and tried to have dinner together, trying to do my wife duties. But Matteo stayed the same, cold and unreachable. The next day, I went to the orphanage, something I used to do before my father died. I brought gifts for the kids, played with them, and felt at peace, even if it was temporary. As I was leaving, Matteo's car pulled up. He watched me through the window, but I pretended not to notice. When I got in the car, he handed me a dress. "We have dinner at my parents' tonight. Wear this and be ready by 7. His tone was businesslike, but something in his gaze lingered on me a moment longer than usual. That evening, when I walked down the stairs wearing the dress, I caught Matteo staring. For the first time, his expression softened, almost in awe. But just as quickly, he masked it and muttered, "We're late." At dinner, his mother, Mary, asked how married life was. I forced a smile, showering Matteo with fake praise, though I knew she saw through the lie. She didn't press further, thankfully. Later that night, back at the house, Matteo and I had too much to drink. One kiss turned into another, and before I knew it, we were on the couch, tangled together. When we woke up the next morning, the silence between us was heavy. Without a word, we gathered our clothes and went to our separate rooms. Weeks passed, and we avoided each other until one morning, everything changed. I fainted in the bathroom, and the maid found me. She screamed for Matteo, who rushed in and scooped me into his arms. His expression was raw with fear as he carried me to the car and drove to the hospital. In the waiting room, Matteo paced, running his hands through his hair, looking like a man on the verge of breaking. When the doctor finally came out, he smiled. "Congratulations, Mr. Carlo. You're going to be a father." Matteo's face lit up with joy, real joy. He rushed to my side, gripping my hand tightly. "Ella," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I lost you. I didn't realize how much you mean to me until now." He kissed my hand. "I've fallen for you, Ella. And now, we have a baby on the way." Tears welled in my eyes as I whispered, "I feel the same, Matteo." We went home that night, and for the first time, I slept in Matteo's room, wrapped in his arms. Months flew by, and the day finally came. I was in labor, and Matteo was out of town handling business in my territory. When I called him, panicking, he dropped everything and raced back. He burst into the hospital room just in time to see our son born. Matteo's eyes shimmered with tears as he held our baby for the first time, and in that moment, everything felt right. We weren't perfect, and our journey had been anything but easy. But as I looked at Matteo cradling our son, I knew I had found love in the most unexpected place. And for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace.